Yes.
Beautiful, got it. All right, all right. Freedom, very good. Wait till we get to the jackal of indifference.
Because I don't have one losses.
I'm good, I like that. All right, so if I make a mistake, I type in grades. If I make a mistake, please let me know. I find it difficult to edit online, so if I make a mistake in your grade, let me know. If I'm typing in scores. I guess if I make a mistake in your favor, it's kind of like winning the lottery. But if I make a mistake in the pose, by the way, yes.
Yeah, the one that.
What's that? Yeah. Still in James? Let me look at that. Okay. In fact, let me jot that down. Okay. So, what power did the Supreme Court give itself? Where they can check the constitutionality of laws. What do we call that? Judicial review, yes. I mean, they literally gave themselves that power. It is not in the Constitution. Nothing's in the Constitution. Who creates the court system, by the way? Yeah, Congress creates it. Yes.
How did they give themselves the power? Did they just say, we have the right, or did they?
They wrote it in a ruling called Marbury versus Madison. They basically said in that ruling that the Supreme Court can check the constitutionality of laws. But it's going to be till the end of the century that people would accept this. It'd still be fought over, and they would nearly go to civil war in 1833 over, called nullification. And due to that, and other stuff, and how many states does it require? And it's written right here for the ratification battle. Yeah, they had to get them all, or they wanted all, or get 9. Remember, the Articles of Confederation said 13. And here they only said 9. And what are some of the key elements of it? This system was designed basically to avoid what kind of change? Yeah, there'd be no radical change. It is very difficult to pass a law and almost impossible to ratify the Constitution. And so that was the plan. So I think we got here. Did we get to here?
We got the AntiFederalism.
Oh, so we got all through this. Now, here's the thing. Strong government. Strong government. I mean, they desperately wanted to limit the power of the states, limit the power of state legislatures, create a sound currency. The policing power of the federal government would hold everything together. So we're here. Did we get any of this? That? Is that where we quit?
Yeah.
So they feared that rule by the elite. And there were a lot of inroads in democracy. A lot of financial inroads that were more inflationary, want to control the Federalists wanted to control that. Did we get to this? We did? Yeah, dual taxation. So dual taxation is taxation by both state and federal government. And it's not that they necessarily opposed those two different kinds of taxation. But the thought was that the power to tax is the power to destroy. And they can make the tax on a good or a product or work, something so high that it would eliminate that. And they were desperately worried about that. They had no real argument that, of course, they believed the state government could tax just like the federal government. It was the power to destroy. Also, they wanted a Bill of Rights. George Mason and Thomas Jefferson. You notice I didn't put Jefferson on there. Jefferson, in typical Jeffersonian fashion, writing letters from Paris, because he was a U.S. ambassador to France at this time, writing letters to the United States. Jefferson straddled the fence, because that's Thomas Jefferson. He's always kind of trying to play both sides. He's definitely one of those guys. I believe we should have a Bill of Rights. On the other hand, he's one of those times. And he wrote his friend Madison, there has to be a Bill of Rights. And Madison would agree. So please get that down. Madison finally just said, okay, I'll write a Bill of Rights. And Jefferson, for the most part, dropped his opposition. This would be instrumental in getting Virginia to pass it. Now, Madison, when he wrote this, at first was thinking, they don't need a Bill of Rights. And that's part of the reason why, when you guys read through the Bill of Rights, a lot of it's kind of gobbledygook. Because he wanted it to be kind of confusing. As he thought it, the Constitution will handle all of it. What's that?
I was just asking if where it says Mason, if it's supposed to be
Mason.
Who's Mason?
Was the main
Oh,
opponent.
okay.
He's from Virginia, he opposed it.
Okay.
Yeah, good question. It is just kind of out there, isn't it? Now, militias. Militias were a key element. There was a feeling that militias won the Revolutionary War, which of course was kind of garbage, except for the fact that they needed the extra troops. But the states wanted those militias. It gave individual states, and therefore the governments of the states, power if they control the militia. Yet the Constitution says Congress creates the militia, and therefore it will be controlled or carried out by the president. And there was a real worry the states would lose that, especially in southern states. In fact, Patrick Henry would rail on this. We need state control of militias to make sure we can put down what? That fear of slave rebellions was overwhelming. Now, Madison and Hamilton, most of them were like, well, we don't want militias. Militias were worthless. They gave states too much power. We don't need militias, except for maybe slave rebellions. This was kind of a weird dual part. He would write specifically part of the Bill of Rights about this fear of state control of militias. But it's kind of gobbledygook too. So, when it went to the states, Rhode Island ran up under, or Delaware ran up under right away, and a few states followed. But the Federalist Papers would be written as propaganda to try to get them to write, or try to get them to pass it. Now, these are state assemblies who would pass it, not voters. The vast majority of people couldn't vote, and those would vote for elite in the states who were the state assemblymen. But they needed these three states: Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, the three biggest states. If those states would not have gone with them, the Constitution, the U.S. could not survive under the Constitution. They needed them. So even though they said 9 states, they needed those three regardless of how many. They needed them. And Pennsylvania came relatively fast, but Virginia, New York was a big fight. Virginia, New York. Now, Jefferson would be instrumental in getting Virginia in, the Bill of Rights. He basically said, okay, we'll give in. We promise we'll solve your problems. Patrick Henry never liked it, but that's what they got. But in New York, they desperately needed this propaganda because the Bill of Rights and whole issue of militia was not as strong there. And so, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, who was a New Yorker, and John Jay, who would, he's not as well known today, but then he was a very famous Federalist. He would be the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. They would vote and they would push this idea that you don't have to worry about the mob. No democracy, and I meant to put down sound money. That's what they really pushed in New York. Sound money. We'll have sound money and we'll pay off those bonds. Sound money. But don't forget, they're trying to lay out this Constitution is great, so pass it. Vote for it. This is not an idealistic version of what we think with this government, how great it will be. They're not writing that. They're writing it as advertisements. And the reason I say that is, and I always got to say this, people today will quote the Federalist Papers claiming this is what the founders wanted for the Constitution. They might have wanted some of those things, but they're trying to sell it. They wrote anonymously, even though everybody knew who it was. Madison wrote the most, then Hamilton, and they were close allies. Until Hamilton would, or Madison would literally punch Hamilton in the gut with his opposition, like totally shocked him. You're opposed to me? It was kind of shocking how fast they went apart. But we are talking a little bit about Federalist number 10. But if you have a democracy, you're going to get factions, political parties, and therefore mob. And we won't have that here. Don't forget, we won't have that. And who will be protected? Those with pride. Madison was very clear about that. People like him. Democracy equals factions equals mobocracy. One more thing I'm going to add about reading things. When you read factions, and you looked it up in the dictionary and looked up factions and saw factions are a smaller group within a bigger group. Fine. Context. Context is really important. It's not enough just to look up a word. You got to think in terms of, okay, I see the definition. Now, how does that relate to what we're studying? The context of it. Factions in politics and government are political parties. So when always think about what terms mean, you have to go and look it up and then get it in context. What's what? Mobocracy? Ruled by the mob. Meaning you people with the right to vote. Thankfully, we'll get rid of that, right? And we'll control things. We'll have sound taxation, strong government. And one thing we should ask, who has an easier time arguing about the Constitution? The Federalists or the Anti-Federalists? Now, sometimes it's easier just to oppose. But they were all over the place in opposition. Write this down next to the Federalists. The Federalists had a great advantage because they're arguing for one thing, the Constitution. All their other disagreements went away. All they care about at that moment, the Constitution. Madison and Hamilton are going to have vastly different views on what direction the country should go. But in 1788, they both were just for the Constitution. The opposition, you have small farmers, you have big farmers, you have some smaller merchants. I mean, they're kind of all over the place. So they couldn't unify. A great advantage. Would it work? Yes. Virginia and New York finally ratified. And once New York ratified, it's done. That's the government. You notice there's still 2 more states. And even though the Constitution said 9, they had to wait until New York and Virginia. Once that happened, that became the government of the land. So this would become the United States when it entered the Union. You notice Kentucky is a part of Virginia still. And Vermont, nobody knew what to do with yet. And Maine is part of Massachusetts still. Here is the last one that we got, the 11th pillar of New York. There's so many cartoons like this. Every time a state would come in, they draw another cartoon. You notice the divine hand for North Carolina, and Rhode Island's crumble. So, yeah, Rhode Island would finally just, okay, we're in. We have no choice. We're stuck. And that would become the government of the land. They immediately have to do a census. They have to have an election. They have to get the electoral college together and get things going. And when Madison wrote, or was thinking of the Constitution, he was thinking George Washington is going to have to be president. He didn't really want it, but he's going to have to be. And this would trigger the Federalist Era. Now, what do I mean by the Federalist Era? That's basically the foundation of the government. Now, this is supposedly Washington showing up in Philadelphia when he first became president. The capital would bounce between Philadelphia and New York. And the Federalist Era would go from 1789 to 1801. Why 1801? Well, the weird quirk of this system, the president, the elections will be in an even number year, every 4 years for president, but the inauguration will be the next year. In fact, the election will be sometime in the fall and or winter of, let's say, 1792. But the president would not be inaugurated until March 3rd, 1793. So there's this long break between the election and the inauguration. Partially because they have this weird thing, we got to get Washington in there. And that's the way it would be till 1933. Then the inauguration will go to January 20th. And so that's why you had the presidential election in the United States would be in November. But so in 2020, but Biden would not be inaugurated until January 20th. Like in Britain, when they change the prime minister, it's literally like the prime minister leaves that night and the new one comes in number 10 Downing Street, and that's where they live. So other systems are a little different. Okay, Britain, Germany is another story. Who's that guy? He's on the $10 bill. Who's on the $10 bill? Who? Hamilton? Yeah. Is that what he said? Did he say Hamilton? Yeah, I couldn't quite hear you. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Who's this? John Adams. Yeah. Who's that? That's Madison. Who's that? Who's that? There's no one there, but who's that? All right, so here's the Bill of Rights. Madison would write 12 amendments, 10 be ratified. This is from a textbook, and I always find this kind of amusing because most people have almost like a cartoonish version of the Bill of Rights and a few little words like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, of press, of assembly, the right to bear arms, court of truth, people, rights kept by the people, you know. He's going. Okay, so is it like that? Well, let's look at a few of these. Now, before writing the Bill of Rights, every single one of these, every single one was in some way a direct or indirect response to what the British did, or at least what they perceived the British doing to the colonies. They were depriving us of our rights. What are our rights? Under the British Bill of Rights from 1693. We have rights and they're depriving us of these rights. And so everyone was a response with a little bit of gobbledygook to make it a little bit kind of gray area. And then add one more very important thing to this. The Bill of Rights only applied to federal law. Only federal. The Bill of Rights would not apply to the states until the 14th Amendment. That would come after the Civil War. That's why the 14th Amendment is the most important part of the Constitution. The most important. Because before, states didn't have to follow any of this. They might write it in their own Constitution, but they did not have to. Yes. Federal. It's for federal. This is only federal. You've just seen the big hole.
Yeah, well, it's just, how do they enforce it? Because it's like the country says you have to give the states your right, just kidding.
You found a big hole. How do you enforce it? Partially, this was in the way that they interpret the Constitution. Because you look at the 10th Amendment, powers kept by the states, or powers that weren't given to the federal government but the states. You know? There's a big hole in the Constitution. And so you didn't necessarily have due process. But you're right, what was the point? Well, this is federal. So it did apply to the territories, for example. And it would be a template for states to follow. But you're exactly right. You're exactly right. And that's why the 14th Amendment would have to be written, because that's what people wanted. So let's get to a few of the rights. Here's celebrating the First Amendment and freedom of speech. So let's get to the First Amendment. Just write down the First Amendment. We got to talk a little bit about this. These are about British restrictions, but also fear of what happened. Now, I've already talked about this before, but let me read it. It's really confusing in the way they wrote it. So it starts with, Congress shall make no law, and then it goes to the different points. So, no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Does it say you have freedom of religion? No, it does not say that. This is where we get a reinforcement of the Establishment Clause, saying that Congress cannot create a state religion. So do write down the Establishment Clause. But does it say you can exercise any religion you want? It says that your right of religion cannot be restricted, but it doesn't say you can do whatever you want. You can have the Church of the Divine Right to steal money from freshmen. That's the church I'm starting. It's my belief. And we go on our daily rituals are to go through the hallway and roll freshmen and steal their money. Who's with me in this church? Can you do that? No. It just says that Congress can't pass a law against your church. But it doesn't mean you can do any religion you want. And there's some pretty horrific ones. Yeah. Establishment. This is the Establishment Clause. You do not have a blanket freedom of religion. It does not say that. So now it says the freedoms as freedom of religion. Not quite. Congress just can't pass a law banning your a specific right to religion, but it doesn't say you can follow any religion because it doesn't define what a religion is. It can say you have freedom of religion, but we're not calling that a religion. So let's read the next one. Congress shall make no law prohibiting. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Catch how I did that? Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Do you have freedom of speech? It just says Congress can't take away your freedom of speech. So it can't pick out individual people and you can't say words, but the rest of you can. But does it define what speech is? You can't say anything you want. Congress could say that's not free speech and ban it. You can't go into a crowded theater and yell fire because you want to hear or you want to watch everyone panic and trample over each other. You know, fire! That's my freedom of speech. You can't do that. So are there bans of freedom of speech? Or is there an absolute freedom of speech? No. Do you catch the clauses here? The little gray areas. That's in everything. So it goes to everything else, doesn't it? You see how that works? Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of the press. I know, just go with me. They can't ban certain types of press, but it doesn't mean that the press can produce what they want. So there can be restrictions. Like there's censorship all the time of the press. All the time. Because they could say, well, that would violate either someone else's rights, or they could say that that would violate national security. All the time. All the time. You do not have a blanket freedom of the press. Or for that matter, Congress shall make no law abridging the right of the people to peaceably assemble. Did you catch where the big gray area is there? Who defines peaceably? You see the gray area. I mean, I can look at you and I can say, you're not peaceably assembled, you're a mob. In fact, in Britain, they would do this. And they literally have the law, and it was called the Riot Act. And they would, to break up people that don't want to protest, they would say, you're about ready to cause a riot. And they would literally come and they would read you the law, AKA, read you the Riot Act. They would read you the Riot Act. And so you got 5 minutes to break up, or we send in the cavalry. Here they come. No. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom to petition government for a redress of grievances. So you can petition government. Do you see the gray area? Thank you for this petition, and I will file it away for later use. Do they have to read it? So, Madison is putting this out, and this is it's revolutionary, but not complete. You do not have blanket freedom of speech. Listen, let me phrase that. Nowhere does it say anywhere in the United States that you have a blanket freedom of speech, or religion, or assembly, or petition. There's lots of gray areas. Lots of gray areas. So that's the First Amendment. It's a pretty interesting one, but you always see we have the right to free speech. Not necessarily. Should you have a right to free speech? See, there's some complexities, isn't there? And then you get who decides. I mean, there's lots of complexities here, but it's not blanket. So let's get to the Second Amendment. Which one is that? Look at that one. Oh, I'm living long schedule. Oh, we got plenty of time. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And by the way, here's two cartoons, one against the Second Amendment, one for the Second Amendment. I think they both completely and totally miss the point of the Second Amendment, but what does that mean? Okay, it's kind of meaningless unless you know what these words mean, right? What does regulated mean in the context of 1788? Because we got to know when Madison wrote this, 1789, when he wrote this, what does regulated mean, you know? It is maintained, but what else? Anything else? More than just maintained. Yes. Very strictly controlled. AKA maintain, control, yeah. A good word for that would be, think of militia, trained. Does that make sense? Well trained. So you don't have a bunch of people, running around, oh, the militia, and start blazing away at trees. Why trees? I like trees. Who's with me? You like trees? You like trees? Anyone scared of trees? Anyone scared of birds?
Oh my God, my niece is terrified of birds. She sees what she thinks. It's hilarious. She's so funny.
That's hilarious. I love seeing my niece afraid. I was a game bird tackle. I'm a bird.
She's probably scared of you.
Yeah, Jay Partridge. Yeah, my parents knew. And they tell me to this day, we never even thought. At least my middle name, You don't want to know. Okay, moving on. Regulated means trained. What's a state? Yes.
They're referring to the United States as a whole.
Both. The state is a country, and the state is the states. Does that make sense? The state is like individual states, but also another term for a country, a nation, is our states. Now let's get to the complex one. Who are the people? Yes.
The white rich men.
In a way, but it's much more broader than that. Who are the people? Yeah. Good guess, but actually they mean even more. Yeah. Even more. Yes.
Citizens.
Even more. Because remember, they counted everybody in the census. The people. Not individuals. The people. Remember what it said? Well, how's the Constitution began? We the. So we the people of the individual states and the United States. You like that though? Yeah. Now let's get to the hardest one. If somebody would have said in 1788, because we got to know the word, what it means in context. What's an arm? Yeah, I know somebody's going to go arm. What's an arm? Some guns are arms, some guns aren't. Yes. Some muskets are, some muskets aren't. Huh?
Like,
Exactly. Military weapons are arms. Cannons an arm. Grape shots an arm. Bayonets an arm. But a hunting rifle, especially at that time, is not an arm because it's completely inadequate for militia. It takes too long to load. In 1788, when you said arms, it's military weapons. military weapons. That's what Madison meant, military weapons. And that is why this is kind of meaningless, and that's also kind of meaningless. Most of the arguments for and against it kind of miss the point of what Madison was saying. Train militia in the States, but also the United States. Why? Gobbledygook. He wanted no state-controlled militia. So when he wrote this, he wanted this as confusing as possible. Is it as confusing as possible? Yeah. Yeah. Arms, military weapons. Yes.
So who specifically did he want? That's where's your somewhere? So who specifically did he want to be able to bear arms? Or is that the really
Militia.
Specifically the militia.
A well-trained militia. He didn't want regular people with cannon with grape shots. Grape shot. Yeah. And think about as weapons change. It'd be the equivalent of someone in their basement having a thermonuclear weapon. You can trust me with it, but I frankly would not trust most other people. Would you trust me? You trust me with it? You wouldn't trust me? I am your friend. And you must agree because I have a thermonuclear weapon in my basement. Yes.
So what about like wild people?
That's a military weapon. If you could be used as a tank. I mean, if it's just, something you have with a gun that you might not have 75mm rounds to use with a Sherman tank. Do you? I don't know. How do we know it's not a militia? This is the way he originally wrote it. And they took it out. That was the original writing. Remember, we'll finish it tomorrow, so we'll start right there. So we'll talk about it. I'm really disappointed that some of you will be afraid I had a nuclear weapon.
I don't know. Why did you go and pay for the White House?
How much is an intercontinental ballistic missile? Thank you. See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Why? Oh yeah, you told me that. Right.
So I don't know if you're gonna do.
I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Okay.
So I'm gonna assign chapter 7 for Monday.
Okay.
And I don't know. I haven't decided yet. We're not doing the quiz tomorrow. I've decided if I'm going to do the quiz on chapter 6. I might just make it a quiz. Everyone's going to do one. I won't give you that to you tomorrow.
Okay.
Just because of the PSAT.
Right. Yeah.
And then if that happens, then I'm just
I
going to
just
assign
started
chapter
reading.
7. Remind me tomorrow. I'll try to get the reviews.
Okay. But there's not going to be an essay. I don't think it's
Not that time.
I'm just doing.
I wanted to.
Okay.
The PSAT.
We'll see. I just really like.
Well, not only that, next week's not really next. And I wanted to do the essay, but I'm gonna have a chance to.
Right. So
I'm
if I
holding
read chapter 7 for this week and do the team split.
You should be fine.
I'll be fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why I think I'll do a team quiz. It'll be easy. Everyone's getting 100.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
7. Yes. No. Yeah.
Is that it? So we need to have notes and reading done for the chapter.
We have a quiz today.
Chapter 6 we're finished. For chapter 6 I signed. I originally wanted tomorrow.
But what's the other good ones for tomorrow then?
No, I think the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was in the text. It was in the review. That's what it is.
Okay.
And I'm not going to give a quiz tomorrow. I keep on forgetting about the PSAT and then the 3-day weekend, or 4-day weekend next week. Kind of a time crunch. So
I only get
if I do a quiz on chapter 6, it would be like really. Sound good?
Yes.
I think the bottom right there.
so like 10 times.
You put a 92 instead of 97.
You don't think I made a 4.
Is there actually
Did -9 instead of -4.
I will change that.
Okay. Thank you.
I can't, it's not up right now, but I'll let myself know.
Cool. Thank you.
So you wanted 77?
A 97.
Oh, you got it. See you tomorrow.
Okay, that's the first step.